because I begin with a quote from Aurobindo Basu, and I don't think we did that. That was November 2nd, during the hurricane. So let me begin. As we continue our series of Savitri Sundays, I wanted to share with you something that my Upaguru, Aurobindo Basu, shared with me. His close friend, Narad, whom he would meet every day and have coffee or tea and read the newspaper, and often they invited me. Here's what Narad said. Quote, one day when I was arranging papers in Sri Aurobindo's room, I put a number of them on his copy of Savitri. Sri Aurobindo quietly said to me, please do not put anything on Savitri. It is my body. End quote. Today I'd like to speak to you briefly about the words Sri Aurobindo uses in Savitri. You may already know that Savitri is the longest poem written in the English language. Sometimes people mention that Kazansaki's Odyssey is 1/3 longer than Savitri, but this is a translation from the original Greek. So Savitri stands as the longest poem, nearly 24,000 lines. In this context, I would like to mention the definitions I use. Firstly, I have, together with my wife, Mary Helen, researched all the volumes of Sri Aurobindo's writings, so we might use all of his definitions first, before going to the dictionaries. We originally began with the Oxford English Dictionary. Since I had purchased the complete 2-volume edition for $100, and then the CD, which was very costly. After completing our work, I wrote to Oxford for permission to use their definitions in this epic Savitri. On 2 occasions, they wrote back that they were not accustomed to anyone asking to use so many definitions, and they charge £300 per definition. So we had to go back again and use other dictionaries from the internet, especially Chambers, which Sri Aurobindo favored. The definitions I share with you are all from free internet sources. Many of you may feel that some definitions are unnecessary because you are familiar with the terms, but I include them for all whose first language is not English. So let us begin then. A contact thrilled of mighty unknown things, awakened to new unearthly closenesses, the touch replied to subtle infinities. And actually, what is an infinity? It's the quality of being without limits, an infinitely large number, amount, and expanse of space or time. And Sri Aurobindo says that we see at once that if such an existence is, it must be, like the energy, infinite. Neither reason nor experience nor intuition nor imagination bears witness to us of the possibility of a final terminus. Very, very important, because he says all end and beginning presuppose something beyond the end or beginning. An absolute end and absolute beginning is not only a contradiction in terms, but a contradiction of the essence in things, a violence, a fiction. Infinity imposes itself upon the appearance of the finite by its ineffable self-existence. And that was from the Life Divine. The next two lines have a word in them, lightnings. And with a silver cry of opening gates, sight's lightnings leaped into the invisible. We had lightnings once before, and these lightnings that flash brilliantly upon us at times when we are truly open. They are flashes, of course. They can be flashes of experience, they can be flashes of insight, and they are lightnings, as Sri Aurobindo calls them. Ever his consciousness and vision grew. They took an ampler sweep, a loftier flight. Now, ample is really fully sufficient or even more than adequate for the purpose. Plentiful. And then I will read some lines which hardly need any explanation, because Ashwapati is now passing the border that is matter's rule. He passed the border marked for matter's rule, and past the zone where thought replaces life. Out of this world of signs, suddenly he came into a silent self, where world was not, and looked beyond into a nameless vast. These symbol figures lost their right to live. All tokens dropped our sense can recognize. So he passes this border that is marked for the rule of matter. And he even passes the zone where thought replaced life. And then he comes into a silent self where there is no world. And he looks beyond into this nameless vast because his consciousness and his vision have grown. And they've taken an ampler sweep, a loftier flight. And so all these symbol figures that are so important to us, they lost their right to live. Symbol figures and tokens that are indications, proofs, or expressions of something, symbols or signs, they dropped their right to live. All tokens dropped, our sense can recognize. And what are these tokens? Well, there are familiar things. There are daily experiences with people, our thoughts, our actions, our reactions, our emotions, etc. And generally in our normal human consciousness, with the thought mind or the thinking mind, we see all things only as forms, unable to peak deeper, to see the soul or the indwelling spirit. Basically, we live with the five senses. We have touch, we have smell, we have hearing, we have sight, we have taste. And sometimes we go into another dimension, which all of us, I believe, as children of the divine, have felt. So now, these three lines. There, the heart beat no more at body's touch. There, the eyes gazed no more on beauty's shape. So here, Sri Aurobindo moves the iambic pentameter a bit, and I'm not a poet, so I can't give you all these poetical terms. But there the heart beat no more at body's touch. It can be scanned in many different ways. There the heart beat no more at body's touch. You can make it a quatrain, but it is indeed 5 beats. There the heart beat no more at body's touch. So there are what he calls anapests, or poetry calls anapests, where 3 beats are compressed into 2. It's very much similar to music, where we will have a line and there's 2 beats in the line, but we sing 3 notes. So this is just a little bit of technicality. It's not that important. So, in rare and lucent intervals of hush. So these intervals don't come very often. They're rare because the heart is not beating anymore at the body's touch. And the eyes are not gazing anymore on beauty's shape, which is very interesting where he is into this region. It's a signless region. And so these lucent intervals of hush, lucent is giving off light, luminous. They can even be translucent and clear. Into a signless region he could soar. A signless means something that conveys a meaning. It could be an object, an action, event, a pattern. But he is in a signless region, something that indicates or acts as a token of fact or condition, something that is not immediately observable. Very, very interesting. Packed with the deep contents of formlessness. So here we have the word content, and it's defined as things contained or held, as in a receptacle. It's often used in the plural, contents. And here it's a noun, packed with the deep contents of formlessness. If we have the word content, it's a verb. So the deep contents of formlessness. And then he says, where world was into a single being wrapped. Wrapped is an interesting word because it is not WRAPPED, but RAPT, which is a totally different word. And I can give you a few things from the dictionary, which are pretty close. Deeply engrossed or absorbed. It could be entranced or transported with emotion, enraptured, ecstatic, and even indicating a state of rapture, where world was into a single being wrapped, like carried off spiritually to another place or another sphere of existence. Sri Aurobindo often uses wrapped, hyphenated, self-wrapped. And now this beautiful section of 7 lines. And all was known by the light of identity, and spirit was its own self-evidence. The Supreme's gaze looked out through human eyes and saw all things and creatures as itself, and knew all thought and word as its own voice. There, unity is too close for search and clasp, and love is a yearning of the one for the one. He's in this region now where the divine is looking through his eyes, and he sees everything by the light of identity, and he knows everything by that light. And he even sees all things and creatures as itself, and knew all thought and word as its own voice. And so their unity is too close for search and clasp, because love is a yearning of the one for the one, and beauty is the sweet difference of the same, and oneness is the soul of multitude. And then he continues, there all the truths unite in a single truth, and all ideas rejoin reality. There, knowing herself by her own termless self, wisdom, supernal, wordless, absolute, sat uncompanioned in the eternal calm. Oh, we almost don't even want to try to explain this passage, because it has to go immediately into our hearts and into our souls. And love is a yearning of the one for the one. And beauty is a sweet difference of the same. And oneness is the soul of multitude. And there all truths unite in a single truth, and all ideas rejoin reality. And now wisdom, there knowing herself by her own termless self, termless, without any terms at all, infinite, wisdom, supernal, wordless, absolute, sat uncompanioned in the eternal calm. Well, uncompanioned is not accompanied by any other, any person or thing. All-seeing, motionless, sovereign, and alone. Their knowledge needs not words to embody idea. To embody something is to invest, especially a spiritual entity, with a body or with a bodily form. To render incarnate, to make corporeal. To give a tangible bodily or concrete form to something, especially an abstract concept. So, all-seeing, motionless, sovereign, and alone, their knowledge needs not words to embody idea. And then he continues with the term idea, seeking a house in boundlessness. And we have a definition, but we have also definitions from Sri Aurobindo. So let me just give you the dictionary definition. That's something such as a thought or a conception that potentially or actually exists in the mind as a product of mental activity. But what does Sri Aurobindo say? And there's quite a bit. In the supramental manifestation, he has two quotes. The idea is the realization of a truth in consciousness, as the fact is its realization in power. So the idea is the realization of a truth in consciousness, as the fact is its realization in power. And his second statement, the idea is not a reflection of the eternal fact, which it so much exceeds. Rather, the fact is only a partial reflection of the idea which created it. And he often uses the hyphenated term real idea. And he says in The Life Divine, the view I am presenting goes farther in idealism. It sees the creative idea as real idea, That is to say, power of conscious force, expressive of real being, born out of real being and partaking of its nature, and neither a child of the void nor a weaver of fictions. It is conscious reality throwing itself into mutable forms of its own imperishable and immutable substance. The world is therefore not a figment of conception in the universal mind, but a conscious birth of that which is beyond mind into forms of itself. Weary of its homeless immortality, asks not in thought's carved brilliant cell to rest, whose single window's clipped outlook on things sees only a little arc of God's vast sky. And the word clipped, a clipped outlook. A clipped outlook is something that's cut off, curtailed, diminished. And then he says, the boundless with the boundless, they're consorts. Well, when you consort with someone, you keep company with them. It's like an associate. While there, one can be wider than the world. While there, one is one's own infinity. His center was no more in earthly mind. A power of seeing silence filled his limbs. Caught by a voiceless, white epiphany, into a vision that surpasses forms, into a living that surpasses life, he neared the still consciousness, sustaining all. Now, the word epiphany is important for us. Sri Aurobindo uses it in very special ways. It's an appearance or a manifestation, especially of a deity. Or it can be a sudden intuitive perception or insight into the reality or the essential meaning of something. So here it's into a vision that surpasses forms, into a living that surpasses life. He neared the still consciousness sustaining all. And we have to realize that he is still in progress of his becoming the greatest sage. The voice that only by speech can move the mind became a silent knowledge in the soul. The strength that only in action feels its truth was lodged now in a mute, omnipotent peace. And Mother does speak to us about the power of the supramental being omnipotent in peace, but it is an extraordinary power. The word lodged, well, we understand what a lodge is, and we understand when we lodge someplace, but here lodged means fixed or implanted, was lodged now in a mute, omnipotent peace. Omnipotent, of course, having absolute, unlimited power. A leisure in the labor of the worlds, a pause in the joy and anguish of the search, restored the stress of nature to God's calm. A vast unanimity ended life's debate. Oh, wouldn't we pray for that? A vast unanimity ended life's debate. The war of thoughts that fathers the universe. The clash of forces struggling to prevail. In the tremendous shock that lights a star, as in the building of a grain of dust. The grooves that turn their dumb ellipse in space, plowed by the seeking of the world's desire. The long regurgitations of time's flood, that the torment edging the dire force of lust, that wakes kinetic in earth's dullard slime, and carves a personality out of mud, the sorrow by which nature's hunger is fed, the estrus which creates with fire of pain. Now I have to go back because there's a lot of things to cover here. First of all, the war of thoughts that fathers the universe. Fathers here is a figurative sense, meaning creates, originates, founds. And the grooves that turn their dumb ellipse in space. Well, a groove is normally a narrow cut or an indentation in a surface, but here it's a fixed routine, a habit, a pattern. And then their dumb ellipse. Dumb is always silent, mute. Ellipse is a closed plane curve resulting from the intersection of a circular cone and a plane cutting completely through it. So these grooves that turn their dumb ellipse in space, plowed by the seeking of the world's desire. Cloud is a very interesting word. Normally, the English spelling is Plough, which Sri Aurobindo has used. And it's often an agricultural instrument, which I have used many times in my life to make furrows or grooves. And so this desire of the world, these desires of the world, the seeking for these are plowed, cut through as if by a plow. And the long regurgitations of time's flood, the regurgitations are movements of rushing or surging back. We can have a regurgitation when we throw out food from our stomach. Movements of rushing or surging back. The torment edging the dire force of lust that wakes kinetic in earth's dullard slime. Kinetic is always relating to motion. And carves a personality out of mud, the sorrow by which nature's hunger is fed. Most interesting line. The estrus which creates with fire of pain. And I'll give you two of our disciples' definitions. First, Alok Pandey, and second, Madhav Pandit. Alok says the heat and pain often experienced during a fertile period conducive to conception. Here it refers to the suffering that human beings go through in ordinary life, which, albeit, is a kind of subconscious process in nature to prepare the being for the birth of the spiritual consciousness within us. So Sri Aurobindo has used a very, very powerful word here. Madhav says estrus is the constant prodding from inside, a fiery sensation. So the dictionary would tell us that it's a regularly occurring period of sexual receptivity in most female mammals, except humans, during which ovulation occurs and copulation can take place. Heat. From the Latin estrus, gadfly, and hence frenzy, from the Greek oistros. And then he says, and we will end with these lines: the fate that punishes virtue with defeat, the tragedy that destroys long happiness, the weeping of love, the quarrel of the gods, ceased in a truth which lives in its own light. All of these things, fate, punishing virtue with defeat, tragedies that destroy long happiness, the weeping of love, the quarrel of the gods, ceased in a truth which lives in its own light. Ashwapati is making tremendous progress. And now he's come to this point where there's a truth that lives in its own light. Namaste to all. Thank you for attending. Very special.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you, Narad.
Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you, Narad.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Narad.
you. Thank you.